Hi everyone, welcome to our second session for the afternoon of our virtual blood cancer patient forum for 2021. My name's Rochelle and I'm a support service coordinator for Leukemia and Blood Cancer New Zealand. Just some quick housekeeping before I hand over to our speaker. If you do have any questions throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. I will try and answer those by the end of the talk. We'll be wrapping up this talk at 3:20. There'll be a break afterwards before our closing talk at 4 p.m. So today's talk is titled Working Through the Difficult Times, a Fun and Insightful Workshop. I'd like to introduce you to Michael Hempseed. He is the author of Being a True Hero, Understanding and Preventing Suicide in Your Community. He speaks to the New Zealand Army medics, GPs and nurses. Michael gained an honours degree in psychology from the University of Canterbury in 2008, and in 2016 he spoke at TEDx. So I'll hand over to you, Michael. Thank you so much for being here. It's all yours.
My pleasure. Rochelle, thank you very much. It's great to be here. Now, I can't see anyone, so I just wonder if we could take a couple of minutes, if in the chat you could write down your name, where you're from, and what do you want to know today? Oh, and sorry, are you a patient or are you a support worker? It just gives me a little bit of an idea who is in the room. Otherwise, I'll be talking to myself and I have no idea if what I'm saying is relevant. So I know we'll be staring blank at each other for about a minute, but I'll give you about a minute just to write that down, just so I can have a little bit of an idea who is watching this today and what you want to know out of this. Great. Yeah. We have people from all over New Zealand today. Excellent. Just give people another 20 seconds and then I shall make a start. Right, while we're doing that, I will share my screen. Rochelle, can you please tell me, can you see that in presentation mode?
Yes, looks like.
It's always great when the technology works. Great. So there's lots. Hold on, sorry, just one more second. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much for doing that. This gives me a little bit of an idea of who is listening to this today. Obviously, we've got some people that are patients, some people that are support workers, some people that are family members. I'll try and cover something for everyone today. And I realize we do have different people at different stages of the journey. So we'll try and get through this. So a little bit about me. When we don't have a global pandemic on, I love to travel. Lately, I've been traveling from my bedroom to my office, which is about a two-minute walk. But normally, when we don't have a global pandemic, I love traveling. I've been all over the world. So from top left to bottom right, I've got China, Morocco, Pisa, Rome, and the bottom left there, that is the Chernobyl nuclear reactor. So yes, I do glow in the dark, in case you're wondering. We've got Brazil and Cambodia. And I like to do ever so slightly crazy things. I've piloted an aerobatic plane, jumped out of a perfectly good airplane at 13,000 feet, driven a Lamborghini around a racetrack in Las Vegas, and I've been hang gliding. Okay, so what I want to look at is some different strategies, techniques, and ideas that can help you with some of the difficult times. And I just want to acknowledge that whoever you are, whatever reason you've come here, whether you're a patient, whether you're a family member, whether you're a support worker, there can be some really amazing times in these journeys, some really positive times, but there can also be some really difficult and challenging times. So we'll try and look at a few evidence-based things that can help with this. I recently read this amazing book called Compassionomics, and it's by Stephen Treziak and Anthony Mazzarelli. And what they've put together is a whole lot of scientific studies that show the more compassion that there is in the healthcare system, either the better patients get, or if they have a terminal illness, the less pain they experience. So it's really important to know that compassion is actually very healing in and of itself. And for a long time, people thought, well, this doesn't really make sense. We know there's all sorts of advanced medicines and treatments and techniques. And yes, we know that that can help someone get better. But it really surprised a lot of people when the research was coming out and showing that actually compassion in and of itself can be really healing. Now, the book is mainly written for doctors, but I think this can apply to anyone, be it, a family member, be it a support worker. But the more caring and compassion that we have, the bigger difference it's likely to make. It may help some people recover faster, or if they do have a terminal illness, it's actually been shown that compassion often takes away a lot of the pain and negativity. One of the things that we know that certainly can happen around cancer is a lot of people experience burnout. And there was this really interesting study that found that doctors that show more compassion have lower rates of burnout. And that sounds really counterintuitive because we often hear that, well, if you care too much, you're going to burn out, and that's a bad thing. But actually, the research suggests the exact opposite of that. The research suggests that one of the most protective factors against this is caring and compassion. So I'll come back to this point a little bit later about why that may be. One of the things that I think it's really important to know is that it's quite possibly easy to be compassionate to other people, but sometimes when it comes to compassion to ourselves, that can be really quite difficult and really quite challenging. And sometimes we think that being compassionate to yourself is about being selfish. Well, that's not necessarily what compassion is at all. Some people on their journey, they're quite accepting of this. They think it's one of those things that happen. But other people can be really harsh on themselves. Sometimes they might question, did they do the right thing in their life? Did they have done something differently? And I really encourage you to try and work on compassion to yourself. So after this webinar or over the weekend or when you have some time, we'll go through a couple of techniques later. But one of the things you could actually do is write down, how compassionate do you think you are towards yourself? Maybe you could give it a rating out of 10. Maybe you could suggest some things that would be evidence of compassion to yourself, or maybe not. And really try and examine that and then try and work through some of those thoughts and feelings. I'll give you a couple of ways that we can do that shortly. I just want to talk about one thing that can really help when things get difficult. So study after study has shown that volunteering can be really helpful for people. So this was a group of mainly retired men in Christchurch, and a lot of them thought, well, we're retired now, we really don't have anything to live for, and a lot of them were pretty miserable in life, they're pretty depressed. And they thought, look, we're not the kind of men that want to sit around and get group therapy, so they thought, what could we do? So what they did was they got together, I think in groups of about 4 or 5, and they went around door knocking, and they said, do you have any odd jobs that need doing around the house? And this could be anything like putting up a shelf, changing a washer on tap, some of those basic jobs. And they went around and they did this for free. What they found was that this had an amazing impact on their sense of well-being. What they found was that, first of all, they had a sense of purpose in life. They were contributing to something positive, and they were doing something really worthwhile. They also made a good group of friends while they were doing this, and it really improved their happiness. So if you are going through a really difficult and tough journey at the moment, which I know many of you may be, I really encourage you to look at ways that you could possibly volunteer. Now, depending on where, if you've got an illness yourself, depending on where you're at with that, some people may not have a lot of physical fitness or energy, but there's other ways that you could possibly volunteer. For example, we know at the moment many people experience great loneliness. We know that during the pandemic, there were a lot of people that are really struggling. And if maybe you're housebound, I know there'll be people here with immune compromised issues, but maybe you could, ring up and just talk to people. And that phone call, to someone could make such a difference. So I really encourage you to think about ways that you could possibly volunteer and help out. It can also take your mind off a lot of negative thoughts. In Christchurch, where I'm from, we have Volcan or Volunteering Canterbury, but there are lots of organisations around that throughout the country. And so volunteering can be a fantastic way to deal with some of these negative and difficult experiences that you may be going through. Now, I know what some of you may be thinking. Some of you may be thinking, well, okay, I don't have a lot of time. And if I end up volunteering, that means I'm going to have even less time. Well, there was this fascinating study from 2012, and what they found was that, believe it or not, if you give away time, that gives you more time. And you might think, well, hold on, that doesn't really seem to make sense. Surely if you give something away, you have less of it. And so what the researchers thought was that, well, if you're generous with your time, often people are generous with the things that they have an excess of. And so researchers thought that if you give away your time, that seems to trick your brain into thinking, I've actually got more time than I do. And so there may be people here that have a terminal illness, and we know that running out of time can be a significant problem. Believe it or not, if you give time away, that can actually trick your brain into thinking you have more time. So it's a really interesting study and quite a different way to look at things. Okay, so what can we do if you get really down, really anxious, or really worried? And you might be thinking, what on earth is this creature here? Well, this thing here is called a cortical homunculus, and it's the representation of how much brain power your brain devotes to different parts of your body. And what we see is that the hands and the mouth are massively overrepresented. And so often when it comes to dealing with difficult emotions, say, for example, if someone gets really worried or really anxious, we often say things like, calm down, it will be okay. But the problem is we often don't hear those words, or we don't really take them in. I'm sure we've all been really anxious at some point and someone just said to us, calm down, don't worry, it'll be okay. And it's actually not as easy to take that in and believe it. But the fact that the hand is so big on the homunculus means that we get a lot of sensory information from the hands. And this means that actually the hands can be a really great source of calming information. So I want to look at a few things that can be done if you are finding yourself overwhelmed, worried, or anxious. A lot of shops sell these things. The Warehouse came out, they sell some sort of version of them. And these things are called squeezimals. And what they are is they're little soft toys made out of memory foam. And a lot of people that get really worried or anxious, they find just pressing this in and watching it slowly rebound can be really helpful. Now, some of you are thinking, well, these are designed for children, aren't they? Originally, they may have been designed for children, but they can be really helpful for adults too. And I think it's really sad that we only use a lot of these soothing, calming techniques for children when all adults at some point will need, have a hard day or go through a difficult time. I was giving a seminar to a group of mothers at a school one day, and I said, this will be really useful for your children. And then all the mothers went over and started playing with these objects, and they found that could be really useful for themselves. So I really encourage you not to dismiss this and think, oh, this is something that's only for children. But a lot of adults do find techniques like this really helpful. This is bumpy material. You can buy things like this at most craft stores. And different textures work for different people, but some people find, say, if they have a square of this in their pocket and they just get really anxious or just everything gets too much for them, sometimes taking time to run your fingers slowly over this can be really helpful. And I've suggested this to a number of people. They say, well, that won't work. Just have a go. If it doesn't work, you don't need to try it again. And actually, a lot of people are really surprised by how helpful and how calming and how soothing it can be. So I showed you before the homunculus, the hands are really large on it. And that's because the reason these things work is because we get so much soothing information from our hands. Some people have things like tassels in their pocket. They find just slowly running their hands over them, again, can be very calming and very therapeutic. You can buy these at craft stores, but they're designed for scrapbooking, but they're basically little metal keys. And some people have them in their pocket. And the idea with this is that if you are getting overwhelmed, you feel each little bit of it, you feel each little groove, each little bump, and each little ridge. And the idea of this is that maybe you're worried about maybe your treatment, or you're thinking, how am I going to get through work? I'm just so tired. I just can't do what I used to. And maybe just everything really is going downhill for you. If you have, say, some of these objects that I talked about in your pocket and you really focus on these things, it can take your mind off some of those negative and some of those bad thoughts, and it can help to ground you and help to take you into the present. Now, I do want to mention, not all these things I'm going to suggest will work for everyone, but if you are having a tough time at the moment, I recommend you have a go. I found it's quite surprising what some people say really does work for them. And again, this is one that we often think of for children, but does actually work surprisingly well for adults too. And that's actually slime in your hands. And I know some people think, oh, this is not going to work at all. But one of the reasons that slime may work is it's actually cold. And we know that a lot of people that get overwhelmed and worried, they get what is called vasoconstriction. And this is where their blood vessels fail to regulate heat properly. So a lot of people that are really worried actually are too hot, and they may not realize it. So there's been quite a lot of research and work gone into helping people that are worried to regulate themselves. So for example, a lot of schools around the country are seeing large numbers of children that have anxiety. And one of the things they're starting to do is, say, put ice blocks in the first aid room. And if people are really worried and anxious, they get them to suck on an ice block. And what that does is it helps to cool their system. The act of sucking tends to be something that you can't do quickly. If you're trying to suck something cold, you have to do that slowly. And so if you're getting really worked up and really overwhelmed and really anxious, it's important to know that that simple act of cooling the body can actually stop some of this and help people to feel safer and calmer. I mentioned before that on the homunculus, the hands and the lips are really big. And we often think that, well, it's only children that can use the lips to calm themselves down. A lot of children suck their thumb, or they get a lollipop, they go to the doctor and they get an injection. But actually, everyone gets a lot of sensory information from the lips. And so the act of chewing and sucking can actually be very calming if people get distressed. These are designed for children on the autistic spectrum, but they could absolutely be used for adults. They're little rubber teeth, and even if you're 60, 70, 80, this could still be something that could work. And the idea is, if you're getting overwhelmed, you can suck on this. And as I mentioned before, some people find things like ice blocks helpful. But possibly one of the most underutilized ways to calm people down, sorry, just 1 second. Possibly one of the most underutilized ways to calm people down is through our sense of smell. And we often think that, say, animals like dogs have a really good sense of smell. And when it comes to human beings, we really don't have that much of a sense of smell. Well, scientists are finding that actually we're pretty sensitive to this. we can pick up 1 part per trillion smell molecules. And the thing you smell with, which is called your olfactory bulb, is connected directly to the emotional parts of the brain. And so what this means is that smell can actually be a great way to calm down. So in the past, people used to sniff Valium if they were getting overwhelmed. We don't tend to do that today. But interestingly enough, researchers have found that the smell of jasmine can be equally calming and therapeutic as the smell of Valium. So if you go to various shops like the Warehouse, Kmart, you can often buy diffusers and they can put various smells in the air. Now, it's important to know that different smells work for different people. So maybe have a go at this. I've been really surprised when I've suggested this to different people, how helpful it can be. I thought this was an absolutely fascinating study. They took a group of researchers that had post-traumatic stress disorder. So a group of researchers took people that had post-traumatic stress disorder and they exposed them to the smell of roses at night. And people didn't realize they were being exposed to this. And what they found was that a lot of what they call the negative symptoms of PTSD, so things like nightmares, things like panic attacks, they found that the simple act of exposing people to pleasant smells at night actually reduced a lot of those negative symptoms. So I think this is something that we really should be thinking about. It's potentially a very powerful treatment, and it could be very effective. So if you are finding that you're overwhelmed by a lot of things, it's really important to know that those feelings are changeable. So if you're feeling really down at the moment, if everything's really getting on top of you, if you're really anxious or worried, it's important to know that those feelings do not have to stay that way. And the great thing about our emotions is they can change. They can get worse, but we also know they can get better. And one of the most exciting findings in all of neuroscience is what we call brain plasticity. And this means that your brain is not fixed, it can change and develop. So if you're the sort of person that is prone to worry or prone to getting down or prone to getting overwhelmed, using some of the techniques that I've talked about can actually help you change those brain connections. And instead of having a connection that says, I get worried easily, it could, if you change it, it could now say, I can actually get through this. I can actually find life a bit easier. One other technique that's been found to be really helpful is journaling. And the idea of this is you write down whatever's on your mind for about 10 or 15 minutes. Don't worry about spelling and just write. And what we know is that a lot of people that have bad thoughts in their head where they're really worried, they're anxious, and they're overwhelmed, they find that those thoughts just go round and around and around and around in their head and they don't get out. So it's like you're on this never-ending treadmill. And the idea of writing something down is that you take these negative thoughts that are in your head and you put them into something really positive, like a piece of paper. So that's something that I encourage you to have a go at. No one else has to read it, and if it's really private, you can burn it afterwards. But just the simple act of writing things down to get things out of your head can be helpful. I know sometimes people have a sandbox and they write in the sand and then they rub it out, and it's like they're getting rid of their thoughts. You don't even have to use words. If you just want to write down pictures to represent what you're going through, that can be helpful. And one of the other things that often happens is when you keep your thoughts to yourself and they're in your head, they can all be jumbled and they can be quite hard to see and they can really be pretty overwhelming. But if you have it in front of you on paper, you can actually see what's going on and you can actually see some of the challenges and the difficulties that you might be facing. So it's important to know that sometimes when you see a problem in front of you, it becomes a bit easier to manage. When it's just in your head, sometimes it can end up being bigger than it actually is. But when you write it down on paper, sometimes you can actually see a way forward with it. So those are a couple of things that can really help you. Okay. I just want to talk about some forms of counselling and therapy. So the things I've talked about so far are all things that you can do yourself. But sometimes people do need a bit more help and support. Not everyone will need this, but some people do. And one of the things we've found is that a lot of people that have gone through a trauma, we've found that a part of the brain called Broca's area, which is the speech and language bit of the brain, doesn't actually work so well. So a lot of people that are going through a really tough time, they actually find it very difficult to talk about what they've been through and what they're experiencing. So researchers are starting to develop forms of therapy that don't involve talking. And this can be really helpful for a lot of people. I'll just go through some of these. So one form of therapy is called art therapy, where you're guided with a therapist and they help you express what you're going through a painting. Just one really, really simple technique of this is if your head just feels like it's going to explode, you could take a paintbrush and just scribble all over a page and just try and show, that's what I'm going through. And then the art therapist could help you to try and work out, well, what does this mean? What's going on in your head? What does this represent? So that can be a great way. And I know sometimes with things like cancer, some people can explain it really well, but other people find it very hard to explain to other people what they're going through. Sometimes it can seem like, well, no one seems to get this, just really, and I don't even think I understand it myself. But sometimes art therapy can help you unlock some of those hidden things. There's also a form of therapy called drama therapy. And this is where instead of talking about what might be going on, you might act this out with a therapist and you might be able to work through some of these emotions. Believe it or not, this is shown to be really helpful for, say, prisoners in New York. And many of the prisoners they've tried this on, they've been hardened criminals, and you think, well, there's no way drama therapy is going to work. And yet, for a lot of them, it helps them express their emotions. Now, you might be thinking, well, I'm not very good at art, or I'm not very good at drama, so there's no way this would work for me. The great thing about these two therapies is you don't have to be good at this. It's about expressing what's going on inside you. So you don't have to be the world's greatest artist to do this. I'm just going to go down to this bottom one here. And there's a lot of research that shows that animals can be really calming, therapeutic, and soothing. And one of the things that we know is that just the sheer act of, say, looking after a pet, patting it, cuddling it, can be really helpful. And there may be some people that, for whatever reason, can't have pets at home, but maybe there's, say, a breeder or something in your area that would let you play with those animals. There are other ways to do this. In Christchurch, we have a cat cafe. So there are, if you can't have an animal yourself for some reason, there can be lots of ways to overcome this. And again, just that act of looking after an animal can be really helpful and therapeutic and calming for people. Just a quick story about how effective this can be. A family came to me and they had a son with pretty severe PTSD, and he had lots of behavioural problems, and he was really quite difficult to work with. The family got him a little kitten, and his behaviour changed dramatically. He went from being this very angry, reactive person. It didn't improve everything, but it certainly made the family's life a lot easier. And so animals can be tremendously calming and tremendously helpful. One of the other just exciting forms of therapy that I'll talk about just briefly is something called EMDR. It was developed over 20 years ago, and not a lot of people have heard of it. But sometimes when people go through a traumatic event, they get stuck in that trauma. An example of this can be what we call complicated grief. So most people, when they experience a grief or a loss, they feel sad for a while, but then over time, that grief does go away. Some people that experience complicated grief, they get stuck in that grief and it doesn't really seem to move for them. So there's several uses for EMDR, but one of them is that it seems to be really helpful for getting people that are stuck in trauma or stuck in grief out of that. If you want a book by the woman that discovered this, her name's Francine Shapiro, and she wrote a book. It's not a clinical handbook, it's a book about some of the success stories of EMDR. And it really does show how helpful it can be for lots of people. If you just in Google say look up EMDR therapist in your area, there's quite a few around the country now. So if you do know someone that's really stuck in grief and really can't move on from that, EMDR can be helpful. Now, I do want to point out that research shows that if someone's grieving, giving everyone therapy at the start can actually be really harmful, because a lot of people, they'll naturally process this. And sometimes if you work through it with a therapist, it can actually dig up those wounds. So this is really for people that are stuck in that grief and they're not improving. Okay, just one other thing that I think is really important to be aware of is something called vicarious trauma. So there was a couple of interesting studies that were conducted on people that were there on the day of the Boston bombing or people that watched it on TV. And what they found was that people that watched it on TV reported higher levels of distress than people that were actually there. And so this has got big implications for families and caregivers going through this. But the reason it's thought that watching is often so difficult is you're helpless, you're not able to do anything. But I said earlier that doctors that show more compassion have lower rates of burnout. And so part of the way to overcome vicarious trauma is to actually try and have more of an active role, maybe volunteering or something like that in some capacity, and then you're not helpless. Then there is something that you are able to do to address the situation. I just want to look at just a couple of things around grief support for people. I talk all over New Zealand and I talk to a lot of people that have lost someone. And what they often say is that when I lose a friend or a family member, then my other friends and family stop talking to me because they don't want to say the wrong thing, because that ends up making the person more and more isolated. So with the work I do teach quite a bit around grief. And I think sometimes people are afraid to say the wrong thing. Or they say, what do I say? Well, often, if there was a magic sentence that could make this all better, we would have found this by now. So instead of having this magic sentence and feeling that we have to say the right thing, being there with someone can be really helpful. I think sometimes we really underestimate the power of just having someone come over and having a cup of tea with us, maybe going for a walk with us. Sometimes even really practical things like doing the lawns. And it's important to know that this isn't just necessary for the person maybe that's got cancer, but also for the support people around them to try and have this. A lot of grief counsellors will talk about saying, talk to people about what do you need. So if you need a friend to come over and go for a walk with you or something like that, or go see a movie or play golf or something, talk to your friends about what do you need and ask for that. There's, although this is written for death, it does apply to other forms of grief as well. There's a fantastic book by Megan Devine called It's Okay That You're Not Okay. And unfortunately, she lost her husband at a young age. And she says that often when she was grieving, people would try and make it all better for her. They'd say things like, this could be the start of something wonderful. You don't know what could be around the corner. And actually, when people that are grieving or going through a tough time hear that, they feel belittled, they feel insulted, and they often feel humiliated. She says that if we really want to help people that are grieving, we actually need to acknowledge the pain and acknowledge how bad it is. So if someone tells you bad news, if you say something like, that's really awful, that is really dreadful. And she says that if you acknowledge that pain, you start to show some humanity and you start to actually allow the person to be real, and you start to allow the person to really acknowledge and really feel what they're going through. And I said before that compassion really helps and makes a difference. And I think when people say things like, oh, it'll be okay, don't worry, something really good could be coming out of this for you, often that's more about them and what they want to feel better. But true compassion means that maybe we have to sit with people that are going through tough times. And sometimes people ask, "Well, what do I do if someone starts crying? Or how do I manage that?" So just sit with them. If someone does get upset, that's okay. You know, sometimes people say, "Oh, I'm so sorry about this." You don't need to be sorry. This is what you're feeling at the moment. Just be there with people. And so I think one of the things that really shows our humanity is to be with people when times are tough, to sit with some of those difficult feelings and to reach out to another person and say, yeah, I know this sucks right now. I know this isn't great, but I'm going to be there with you. And so it's really that togetherness, that connectedness that can make such a difference. Okay, how are we doing for time? Great, we are good. Just a couple of other points that I want to make. So you might recognize this person here. His name's Patch Adams. There is the movie about him, but I really do encourage you to learn a little bit more about his life. The movie doesn't really show some of the great things that he achieved. And one of the things that he is known for is obviously his comedy, but he also tried to set up a hospital that ran for 20 years that offered help to people for free. And so, you know, he's more than just a funny doctor. There's a lot more to this story. I do recommend, if you have the chance, read his book, Gesundheit, talking about the way that he sees medicine is that medicine shouldn't be a business, that it's about humanity and caring for people in need. So it's a really inspiring book. But one of the things, but he does focus a lot on laughter. And he says, remember laughing? Laughter enhances blood flow to the body's extremities and improves cardiovascular function. Laughter releases endorphins, other natural mood elevating and pain killing chemicals, improves the transfer of oxygen and nutrients to internal organs. Laughter boosts the immune system and helps the body fight off disease, cancer cells, as well as viral, bacterial, and other infections. Being happy is the best cure of all diseases. Now, I do want to be realistic. If you have been given a diagnosis of terminal cancer, laughing may not help, cure you, but it can certainly take away some of the scary pain that people might experience. And I think we live in a world that suddenly got very serious, and we don't really have much space for fun in the modern world. Some of the things that really is sad to see that we're often so busy and so serious, and we've got so much on, and yet there doesn't seem to be time for fun. And so one of the things that really can make a difference is trying to find fun. Now, I told you that I give lectures all over New Zealand on suicide prevention. I love my job. It is truly wonderful. But obviously, I hear some really hard and really difficult stories. So I try and, when I'm not working on the stuff, I try and have fun. And so a few years ago, I learned how to make an origami paper crane. And most people make ones that are about that big. And I thought that's kind of boring. So I got together with a group of friends and we made a 12-foot by 12-foot paper crane, just for the sheer fun of this. And so I really encourage you to think about what are some things that you can do that maybe don't have any purpose other than to put a smile on someone's face. One of the parts of the movie Patch Adams that I do really like is there's a number of wonderful scenes in there where he really works with people that are having a difficult time, and he does something to put a smile on their face. And I think that is what we need to try and have more of. Something else that I do every single year is I love decorating my house for Christmas, and the whole point of this is to put a smile on someone's face. It's really interesting. Obviously, we have quite a few young children that come around, and yes, they really like it. But it's also interesting to see the looks on adults' faces as well. And I guess one of my reasons for doing this is that, as I said, we live in a world that's so serious, and there can be so many difficulties, and there can be so many challenges. But actually, we need to put a smile on people's face. We need to be able to tell people that actually there can be some good in this world, and try and find those few moments of magic that you can give to people. And I think sometimes, we think, oh, well, it's only children that have a sense of wonder. But actually, this is something that adults can have as well, and it can be really important. Now, I do have a little bit more that I want to continue with, but just before I do we have any questions for me at this stage? And then I have something that I want to finish with.
There's a couple have just come through, Michael. Thanks for the really useful talk. Do you have any tips for managing family friends who do say unhelpful comments?
Yeah. I think you can be sit down with them and have an honest conversation with them and try and say, when you try to be really helpful or try to be really positive, I actually didn't find that helpful. I actually found that really difficult. And sometimes actually being really honest with people and saying the sort of comments that you want can really make a difference. If you go on YouTube, Megan Devine does have a couple of shorts, I think 3 and 4 minute videos on how to talk to someone that's grieving. So maybe you could share that with them. I think a lot of people are trying to be helpful, but unfortunately, because we live in a culture that's allergic to grief, we don't teach people these skills. And so sometimes trying to teach people this can be really helpful. She does say that if there are people that persistently give you comments that are unhelpful when you're grieving or going through a hard time, sometimes you do need to stop seeing these people, but you really should give them several chances to try and change. And sometimes people are doing this not because they're trying to do the wrong thing, they're trying to do the best they can, but they haven't been taught any other way.
Cool, thank you. One other one here is a couple of these therapies sound like they're really helpful for me. How would I go about finding a therapist who uses these methods?
Yeah. So depending on where you are in the country, if you Google something like, say, if you're in Tauranga, if you Google Tauranga art therapist, if you're in Vicarious, Google, say, EMDR therapist in Vicarious, that's one way to find some of these people. There's also something called the Family Services Directory. I'll put my contact details up. If you can't find any of these things, feel free to email me later. But the Family Services Directory has a complete list of almost all the help and support agencies throughout New Zealand. And so that can be a good place to look for some different forms of help. Did we have any further questions?
They were all the questions there, but feel free to ask away, participants, if you're listening in.
Okay, right. 8 minutes or less before we finish, I've got one last thing that I want to talk about. This may apply to some people, it may not. But one of the things that I know that some people really struggle with a diagnosis of cancer is a sense of failure. Sometimes it's a sense, why did this happen to me? What happened here? Although my story is somewhat different, I do want to examine the topic of failure that some people go through. So often when people like me get up to speak to groups, they tell the group about all the amazing things they've done, all their great achievements. Well, I'm going to tell you about my biggest failure. In 2012, I was living in the UK and I'd always wanted to do a magic trick in front of a large audience. And I thought, finally, this is my chance. So I applied, I got through, and it came to the day of filming. And I said, I need 20 minutes backstage before I go on to set this trick up. And they all said, that's fine, that's not a problem. Unfortunately, someone came to me at 4:30 in the afternoon and they said, we need you on stage now. So nothing was set up correctly. Everything that could possibly have gone wrong did go wrong, but everything that could not possibly have gone wrong also somehow managed to go wrong. I had 3,000 people in the audience yelling, off, off, off. It was one of the worst moments of my entire life. But it gets worse than that, because Amanda Holden was absolutely horrible about my teeth, and this was going to be broadcast in front of 12 million people. So if you're going to fail, fail big, right? Yeah, so when this happened, I thought my life was ruined. I thought every time I apply for a job, someone's going to Google my name and say, no way. And anytime I wanted to get into a relationship with someone, they were going to say, it's not going to happen. So I was running school camps in the UK at the time, and the day after the show aired, a new group came in. And I was hoping they had not seen the most popular show on TV. It turned out they had, and they wanted to know what happened. Well, first of all, I went round and I asked them what their talents were. And they came to me and I said my talent is failing. And they all laughed at me. But then I said, no, I'm serious. Anyone can fail once. That requires no effort and no skill. But to have the talent of failing, you need to fall off the horse, get back up and try again. Now, this was a group of teenagers. They didn't give me a lot of feedback at the time, but afterwards, some of them came up to me and they said, "We think you're one of the most inspiring people we've ever met." And I thought, hold on, hold on. I made a turkey of myself on national TV, and they were calling me inspiring. And to be honest, I thought they were just being nice about it. But then another group came in, they'd seen the show, and I got the same reaction from them. Since I got a good reaction from that group, I told a few more groups, and eventually I did a TEDx talk on this a couple of years ago. I've told tens of thousands of people this story. And it took me a long time to work out why people like this story. But eventually, what I realized is we live in a culture that is allergic to failure. When everyone runs a race in school, we like to give them a certificate of participation. The problem is, in real life, if you experience a relationship breakup, you do not get a certificate of participation. And so there's many people that grow up in this culture where they don't know how to fail. And I don't know where you're at in your journey, but some of the people that I've walked alongside with that have a diagnosis of cancer, they often blame themselves. They oftentimes are harsh on themselves, maybe something around the cancer diagnosis, but also sometimes around maybe friendships that didn't go so well over the years or mistakes they may have made in the past. And some people do keep these things to themselves and they beat themselves up for it. I talked at the start about compassion for yourself. And so if you are going through something like this, one actual way to overcome this is to share this a little bit more. I might just skip that one for now. I just want to give you an impact on how much, I just want to give you an idea of how much of an impact failure can have on some people. At one of my talks, I gave my failure talk, and this teacher came up to me at the end. So he was a principal of a school, and I knew this person. He was looked up to by everyone in this community. And yet, when he heard my talk, he really liked the talk. And so I asked him, "Have you failed?" And I was expecting him to say something huge, such as, he'd had 10 divorces, he'd spent 6 years in prison or something like that. And he said to me, "I failed my first paper at university." And this must have been 20 or 30 years ago. And what I realized that despite the fact that this person was hugely successful and everyone looked up to him, he was still beating himself up over that failure that occurred. And when I shared my failure with him, it helped him feel better about some of the challenges that he had been through. So I really encourage you to think, if you are dwelling on past mistakes, which can happen for some people when they get a diagnosis of cancer, one simple way to overcome that and work through that is to actually share that with other people. Sometimes when you don't keep these things to yourself, it can make a real difference. I'm just going to skip this one here. And just someone else that really failed in their life was Abraham Lincoln. Now, we often think of Abraham Lincoln as this amazing president that played a big role in ending slavery in the US. But one of the things a lot of people don't know about him is that he had two businesses that failed. One of them failed so badly, he ended up with a debt that took him 17 years to pay off. And I think we should try and find more of these stories. It's not to bring these people down, but I think when we know that great people like this overcame such adversity, it actually makes them even greater. So again, if you are harsh on yourself for some of the things that might have happened in your life, I really try and encourage you to find other stories like this where people may have found it difficult. So I said that in 2012, when all this happened, I thought my life was ruined. I can tell you today, I am genuinely happy and I love what I do for a job. I give somewhere between 150 to 200 talks around the country every year, so I'm not exactly short of work. A few years ago, I met the wonderful Avita. Now, yes, when I met her, she did Google my name. Yes, there was some explaining to do, but we got there eventually. The point is that if things have gone wrong up until now, it doesn't have to be that way. You can overcome mistakes. And so I know this may not apply to everyone, but I'm very aware that some people with cancer, they do really beat themselves up over this. They are really harsh on themselves. If that is you, I really encourage yourself, allow yourself to have some compassion towards you and try and put some of those mistakes aside, because actually everyone fails, everyone gets it wrong. And sometimes the more open and honest that we are about our failures, the more healing that can be. Something that I do have on Thursday of this week is a free talk on sleep anxiety and mental health. That's 7:30 online. If you follow this link, if you email me in a minute, I can send it to you. But if you do want to learn a little bit more about some of these topics, there's that. It's aimed at teenagers, but look, this can apply to anyone of any age group. You can come to this if you want. So if you do want to learn a little bit more about that, that is there. And there's my email address. And if you do have any questions or want the PowerPoint that I gave you today, I'm very happy to share that with you. How about that? 3:20. Look at that. Just before we finish, was there any questions that anyone had?
Thank you so much, Michael. It doesn't seem like there's any more questions that have come through, but yeah, such an informative talk. Thank you so much for your time, and yeah, some really great practical tips and easy tips as well, I think, for people who are maybe in hospital or at home to be able to journal or yeah, use stress balls or just those different textural things. Is such a yeah, great option for people, particularly going into quite worrying, stressful times. So yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to have to re-watch this and take a lot more notes and start reading some of those books. So yeah, so thank you again. We really appreciate your time and being here and being able to talk. There's a few kind of comments coming through. Just thank you so much for all your insights. Very, very grateful. Awesome talk. Thank you so much. Yeah, so we do really, really appreciate it.